for the past 2 years has been saying, you've got to get this guy. And this is really fascinating. His book was great. So we finally got in touch with him, and he is Professor Thomas Visser, who teaches heritage studies and historic preservation courses at the University of Vermont, where he has worked since 1985. Much of his scholarly research and advocacy has focused on preservation of rural buildings and landscapes. His award-winning Field Guide to New England Barns and Farm Buildings was published by the University Press of New England in 1997. He's also the author of Porches of North America. Oh, that could be cool.
Well, we can talk about that too, but next time.
Right.
Maybe we get some other pictures of fun.
Right, and numerous articles, professional reports, and nominations on, to the National Register of Historic Places. Professor Visser.
Well, thank you very much. Well, it's an enormous pleasure to be here and to see so many faces that are just, I don't know, I'm feeling quite connected with you all, especially, oh, sorry. I will try to speak up. If you don't hear me, just raise your hand and I'll try to speak louder. As a professor, yeah, it's been 40 years, believe it or not, but I think we're all kind of in the same club with regards to perspective on time and those things. Yeah, so for the past 40 years at the University of Vermont, I've been teaching, and the first decade or so I was doing consulting. And as far as the teaching is concerned, most of our focus has been on graduate studies, preparing our students for professional careers, working in the field of historic preservation, including a good number of graduates who have served at the Vermont State Historic Preservation Office and other state preservation offices around the country. So much of this field of historic preservation is about community engagement, and that's what's, for me, so much fun to be with you here tonight, or this afternoon. I think the other thing is, within the context of graduate studies, so many of our classes are held in what we call a seminar format. And as it turns out, just because of some technological issues, instead of having the lecture format, where me, with the bow tie and all that stuff, we are in the seminar format, which means we're going to be open for discussion. And I'm really looking forward to getting your points shared as well. And to start, this really reminds me of attending town meetings. How many of you attended town meetings before? All right. Okay, so a little bit of biographical background. I was born in Boston. My family moved to New Hampshire, rural New Hampshire, when I was about 5 years old. So I grew up in the Lakes region of New Hampshire. And hey, at that time, in the 1950s, okay, it dates me, and into the 60s, in our grade school, it just so happened the town meeting was always held in the auditorium at grade school, and so from about the 3rd grade on, we went to town meeting. With the rest of you, we learned our Robert's rules and the way the game could be played, with the politics on the local level. So, this whole issue of kind of engaging with the population without, shall we say, stepping on too many toes, and what that can lead to, I think it's kind of deeply ingrained in many of us here. I assume, especially those of us who have grown up with kind of some of these New England community traditions. So just continuing on with the background there, I went to the University of New Hampshire and majored in business. And as it turned out, again, I think of many of us of the same generation. I graduated in 1973, at which point there was a huge economic collapse, and there was no work. So I ended up paying my bills and finding, and just doing that by doing odd jobs. So I started doing odd jobs, painting ceilings, painting floors. My grandfather had been a contractor, and at an early age he showed me how to hold a chisel, hold a saw, and so on. So what else is there to do? Fix old buildings. And growing up in rural New Hampshire, here we go. Better? Okay. there were plenty of old buildings to fix, including lots of old barns. Indeed, in the home that my parents had when I was in grade school and in high school, we had a wonderful 1912 barn. It was a dairy barn, and we had no animals there, but it was sort of this firsthand experience of the neighbors. They did have some heifers, and they did raise a few animals basically for meat, but they wanted our hay. So we had a 20-acre hay field, and we had worked out a deal where I guess the head of the Board of Selectmen, he would come by with his mower and his baler, and then the neighbors would come with their pickup truck, and everybody would put the bales on the back of the pickup truck and put them up into my father's barn in the hayloft, and my father was paid $1.50 a bale for the hay and for storing it there for the season until it was necessary to be used by the neighbor. So it's sort of one of these things. Okay, we weren't directly farming, but we sure were in that barn, and that barn became my brother and my sort of our home base. How many of you have, well, at some point in your lives, lived in a place with a barn? Look at this, almost every, okay, so there's something, we didn't have any animals. We certainly had a vegetable garden. But the barn was that kind of magic place. We learned lessons in barns. One lesson that I learned was never walk into the barn without wearing shoes. Okay, and what was the lesson? How did I learn that? A pitchfork? Yes, indeed, picking, ouch, and then picking up and having to pull the pitchfork out from the, okay, was that lesson, and so on. It turned out that on the hot summer nights, no air conditioning, of course, in that era, with the upstairs bedrooms in the house, we had the choice, my brother and I, are we going to sleep on the porch or are we going to sleep in the barn? And so we adapted a back room of the barn that had formerly been a place where there was a cider press, but we adapted it to our apartment. Okay, and so this is sort of where, as teenagers, we would escape, and I think, my parents probably, they didn't complain, we didn't complain, and we had our own domain out there. And what about the necessary? Well, what did the cows do? Okay, et cetera, et cetera. There was a hole in the floor, and you know where I'm going with that. So that was sort of the way that we, sort of dealt with the issues of, spending the evenings in the barn and so on. It also became the center place for just so much family activity. And indeed, my father's hobby, although he was a businessman and a salesperson, and everything was like this. But on the weekends, our hobby was fixing up old wooden boats, and we went through one sailboat after another, these decrepit things with rotten everything, and then for years we would rebuild them in the barn. So the barn was literally our workshop. And it was this sort of place of, gathering, and, doing projects together and so on. So, all in all, I can just say that, the barn, for me, and I hope for some of you too, has been a place of sort of, shall we say, special meaning. In high school, my first job was picking apples at the orchard across the street. We get paid 15 cents a bushel. Anybody, if you want to, for the Macintoshes. And at the end of the season, I was pretty proud one year that I got $20 for, picking apples on weekends, but, and climbing up the ladders. But it was that was my first job. My second job that I worked on throughout high school was on a vegetable farm, again, in New Hampshire, in Marlborough, New Hampshire. And my first task was to pick peas. Then, depending on the season, it was then picking peas, then beans, and then hoeing the lettuce, and on and on. But that was sort of our regular job through high school. But, you know, in order to keep the fertility of the soil, you know, nice and strong, the farmer's family, they raised chickens. They raised broilers by the thousands. And so they had a great big broiler house and a big barn, 2 or 3 floors of chickens in there. And not so much for eggs, they did a little poultry, but mainly for broilers. But you know what the chickens leave behind? Okay, well, that was the main fertilizer for the fields. And, you know, where do we get our exercise? Shoveling to, you know, move it. So anyway, there's that kind of realm of experience, you know, the odor and the whole 9 yards. But it's sort of part of that growing up, you know, not on a farm, but in a farm and so on. So anyway, like I say, after I graduated from the University of New Hampshire, you know, with this business degree, and there was no business, hey, I worked in a radio station for a while and, you know, did a little announcing, a lot of sales, and that kind of petered out as well. But what really kind of resonated with me growing up in rural New Hampshire was working on old buildings. That was sort of the hobby, and when the economy was in a tailspin, people still had to get things fixed. So I did that for about 10 years. You know, we had what we called our quote-unquote Underground Carpenters Association. This was when laws on these matters were a little bit looser, and whoever got the job was the boss, and everybody was responsible for whatever taxes or whatever, you know. So, you know, sure, you know, we paid taxes, but we had to do it all self-employed, and it was great. It was a great learning experience, a lot of camaraderie, and a lot of the buildings that we worked on were old barns. So, you know, sills, roofs, jacking things up, the whole 9 yards, really kind of that hands-on experience. So then, you know, as the story goes, I'm being a little bit biographical here, I hope you don't mind, but it's sort of certain, I think it was a January or February, and I was working on a building, and I was up there doing some roof repair, and it was pretty icy, and right off the roof and down to the ground. Fortunately, it was only 1 story, but I sort of said to myself, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. You know, I was by that time in my mid-20s. So I said, okay, I've got to, enough is enough. We got to move out, or move on. My first step was to book a month in Europe. Okay, truly, I mean, I've got family. My grandparents came from the Netherlands, so I went there and I visited relatives there and in rural Friesland, and it was amazing. It's just sort of a whole different viewpoint, which I think for many of you who also have gone abroad, suddenly, wow, this is not the same place. And I know absolutely that I returned with a case of what's known as reverse culture shock. And you know, suddenly my home place was not the same anymore. I saw the world through a very different set of eyes. And that sort of led to an interest or an interest in learning more, I guess I could just say. So I know I went to a number of conferences around Canada and so on. I ended up going to Berkeley in the School of Architecture, did an intensive summer course there. I really loved it, but it wasn't quite me. I don't know. I just didn't really feel that compassion to be designing, I don't know, condos or new buildings. I liked old buildings, and so. As it turned out, on my drive back across the country from Berkeley, California, took the long loop and up through and around, I passed through Burlington. And let's see, and I stopped there. I arrived on Church Street, and it was like, okay, it was 1983, Church Street. Had just, you know, had been turned into a pedestrian mall, at least the center 2 blocks. And wow, this is interesting, you know. And I quite frankly kind of fell in love with the place. So this is magical. And then I had heard about a graduate program in historic preservation at the University of Vermont. So, okay, we're being filmed here, but anyway, okay. After spending the night in my truck in the back, because that's why I was sort of camping. I went up to the University of Vermont and I wandered into the history department and immediately kind of met some graduate students, and they said, oh, you're interested, well, sit in on a class. I met Chester Liebs, the director, and yeah, I mean, it was just, oh, well, this is really neat. So I applied, and within a year or so, I became a graduate student at the University of Vermont. And during our first semester, Chester Liebs was offered a job down at Columbia to become the director for their program. And so Don Andrews from Morrisville became our interim director. And Don was absolutely wonderful, very, very supportive, really bringing a Vermont perspective, if I could, on our projects. Our class project was focusing on rural Vermont. And so we just drove all over Vermont, photographing places, talking to people, and that was sort of our main project, sort of looking at the future of rural Vermont. So then, as it happened, who knows, during that summer of when between my second and third semester there, a job opening came up at the University of Vermont to direct the Architectural Conservation and Education Service and to do some teaching. I applied, a few other people applied, and fortunately, I don't know how it happened, but I was hired. And I guess it was just kind of the right combination of some hands-on experience and, academic degree and whatever. So anyway, I started out basically running a business for a nonprofit organization, which I'm sure some of you have done this as well. I had to do enough consulting to bring in enough revenue to cover my salary, my overhead, my expenses, and a certain amount to the university as well, and then to do some teaching. So for the next 10 years or so, it was the hustle game, which provided me with that opportunity to provide consulting services with a lot of support, a huge amount of support through the Preservation Trust of Vermont, because the Preservation Trust had and still has a technical assistance grant program, and one of those relates to our topic of the day, is for encouraging barn preservation. So what I was working on, and they are still running this for any of you who have barns and are wondering about, okay, what do we need to do next? Basically, the way it would work is that the consultant, in this case I was acting as the consultant, would spend half a day at the property and would just look at the whole outside envelope of the building. What's the condition of the roof? How are the sills? How are the foundations? And then try to come up with a prioritized list of work that should be done in order to at least stabilize the building. Keep it from getting worse, not necessarily to turn it into something else, but at least to maintain it, but to do it in a sort of logical sequence. And so what that provided with me personally was the opportunity to learn a lot about barns in Vermont. I recorded those conditions with my camera. I was writing up reports. I was keeping notebooks on these things. And then in, I guess it was probably around 1992 or 1993, I heard about a federal grant, a design arts grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. And so I applied for it, and sure enough, I did receive funding to do research on the history of barns in New England, and basically it just covered my expenses for driving from Aroostook County, Maine, all the way down to southern Connecticut and Rhode Island. And so for the next 2 years, on weekends and vacation time, I didn't get a sabbatical. I was weekend because I had to be hustle to do the consulting. But it gave me the opportunity to get out and sort of follow my passion, my interest in the history of barns. And I'll tell you, through that experience, what was the most rewarding part of it was connecting with people, just like we're doing today. Yes, what I recognized at the time is that there were a number of, shall we say, beautiful coffee table books with outstanding photography of barns And we still have that going on in films and so on, and great. But what I was trying to do was to kind of connect from an academic point of view to document the history of barns in a way that perhaps, would go beyond the standard approach in architectural history of focusing on style and the importance of the people who owned it. Not to say that all barn owners aren't important, but there's often a kind of a bias. It's the biggest, it's the grandest that gets the attention. Well, what about the rest of them? So basically, my project was to drive back roads, dirt roads, sure, all over New England, and when I saw a barn, I'd pull over, stop, and if somebody would be out there, I'd sort of introduce myself and have a conversation if possible, and learn more about the history of the barns and so on, which is what I did also for this talk this afternoon. And I had a wonderful excursion through Calais and East Montpelier and talked to a number of farm owners and barn owners, and I took some slides, which, hey, if we ever come back again, maybe we could show the slides next time. But anyway, it really did provide some sort of insights into a number of the current issues that barn owners are facing today. So anyway, turning the clock back to the 1990s, the results of all of that driving around New England, photographing barns and talking to people, basically I ended up, this was pre-digital, and so it was slide film and black and white film. And so I ended up with thousands of slides, and basically from a kind of an academic point of view, what I did is I sorted those slides by building type. Every photo I took, I mapped its location, I kept a log, and then I sorted them by building type. And what that provided would be several dozen examples of chicken coops, from Maine to Rhode Island. Several, dozen examples of horse barns, dairy barns, stables, and so on. And so by looking at the physical evidence of what's there, and that's kind of one of my messages I would have had a slide going up here, but it's what can we learn from the physical evidence on barns, especially in other buildings, about their age and uses. And one of the things that came about through this research was that there were a number of variations in how barns were built, especially going back to, say, before the 1840s. So if we're looking at that period from the 1700s into the early 1800s, for Vermont, the oldest barns are 1790s. I mean, really, it's kind of after the close of the American Revolution that the physical story begins. But during that first period, barns were basically constructed, as were other buildings, with a method that's known as a scribe rule frame. And for a scribe rule frame, the frame, think of it as the skeleton of the building, the skeleton of the barn. One thing that's so great about barns is that you can see the skeleton. In a house, you've got the walls and everything else, so it's hidden. But in the barn, you walk in and you can see that framework and how the work was done. So for this scribe rule frame, basically the technology that had been passed on, with the various immigrants, especially coming from Europe over many generations, was that each joint was custom crafted, custom carved almost to fit together. So you've got your posts and your beams and your sills and your ridge pole and the rafters and so on. And each one of these joints would be pre-adjusted, and then they would have a raising. And the timber framers, who was they weren't just carpenters, they were specialists, and they still are specialists in crafting these frames. They each place where those barn members would connect would be marked on the wood with what's known as a marriage mark. And these marriage marks are kind of like Roman numerals in a way, but each crew would have their own alphabet or whatever to designate how this post went into that and so on. And so they would have basically, they could spend months crafting the various timbers, and then all of a sudden, okay, it's time for the big barn raising. And by looking at those marriage marks, they would know which piece of the grand puzzle would fit together and put up the barn. Well, there was a fundamental change that happened in the way things have been made that really started to take off around the early 1800s. And in Vermont, we can really see this in the manufacturing industries as evidence of what was happening in the so-called Precision Valley, the Connecticut River Valley. And what this concept was almost to apply mathematics, if you will, to a problem-solving situation. And instead of crafting each part individually to fit together, the idea was to use precision as a way to create standardized parts that could be interchangeable. So it probably heard about this. I mean, it revolutionized the weapons industry, so indeed weapons were being made right here in Vermont and being sold around the world because suddenly the cost would, and the trigger would fit this and that, and so, but that same concept was being applied to building construction, and especially barn construction. And the shorthand way that it was described, it was being called the square rule. And the framing square, the right-angled tool, sort of became the standard tool for barn makers. And what they would do then is, let's say I'm the boss of the crew, and I could say, okay, we need 4 corner posts, and each corner post should be measured 8 inches by 8 inches, and from the top to the bottom should be 14 feet high, and at let's say 7 feet, there should be a 2-inch by 8-inch mortise to allow the side girt to come in, and so on. And just from that information, then, the various workers, maybe they make a little sketch, but there's that uniformity, and it didn't necessarily matter which brace was to go where. All of the corner braces were made following these sort of standardized rules, in essence, that were set up for the design. So what that did is it really revolutionized the way that buildings were constructed. It dramatically reduced the amount of time necessary, and we can see that in the buildings. And what it is, especially during that early period, 1800 to 1830s, when many of our older barns were made from timbers that were not sawn, and even if they were sawn, they would kind of have variable dimensions. But the key to look for, if you have an old barn with a post and beam frame, if you look at where the post comes up and it meets the cross, say the plate, which is where the roof comes down and there's that horizontal plate, underneath the plate at the top of the post, what we'll typically see is a little cutout. And the same thing at many of the other joints. And basically what they were doing is, rather than, you've got this plate that may have a height from, 8 to 8 3/4 inches. It's kind of hand hewn, it's going up and down. But right at that critical place where the joint was, they would use their framing square and they would cut it out so it was precisely 8 inches. And the same thing where the other posts can't come in. It would be precisely 8 inches and so on. And we can see these little cutouts that tell us that they were going for this kind of uniformity of precision rather than the trial and error scribe rule frame from the earlier ones. The other transition in the technology that, again, we might look for are nails. Now, nails, of course, were primarily used not for fastening the frame together. That all would have been pegs.
but for the nails to fasten the boards to the walls. And so the big change in technology there was from hand-wrought iron nails to cut nails. And the hand-wrought nails, as the name implies, would have been hammered out one by one from a long nail rod. The nail makers would heat up the end, soften the iron, pound it with a hammer to make a point on it, cut it off, put it in a hole in an anvil, or heat it up, and then put it in the hole in the anvil and hammer on a head. And so you can sort of see there are different types of heads, the kind of butterfly heads, but they're all irregular because they're all made by hand. So this then was the way that nails were being made, both here and especially being imported, especially from Britain and so on, well until the 1790s. And then there was a transition in nail making to make what are known as cut nails. And for the cut nail, it would be a sheet of iron that would be run through a machine, might be water powered early on, and that machine would basically whack off sort of these angled pieces of metal that would then become the nails. So, I mean, we know that there were nail making operations going on at Winooski Falls and Burlington, and there were many others scattered around Vermont and so on for these early nail making machines. The earliest type are type A cut nails. I'm getting technical here, but from around 1790 to 1800 until around 1820, first decade or two, the way that it worked is that the plate of iron came in. I'm going to need two hands here. And then the cutter would come down, and then it would advance and turn a little bit. It would come down, advance, turn a little bit, and come down. So you get these little widgets, these little angles to cut off. Well, the problem was there was an awful lot of wear and tear on the machines. They would cut back. And then someone, and I don't know who, came up with an invention then. Instead of wiggling the plate back and forth, they said, what about flipping the plate? And so the bar would go in, and that way, down would come the cutter, take it off, rotate 180 degrees, cut it, and so basically every other nail is tapered in the other direction, so you get your tapered nails. So those we call type B cut nails. And so now we've got three different types of nails. Hand-wrought nails before around 1790, type A cut nails from the 1790s to around the 18 teens, and type B from the 1820s to the present. Okay, so, two true things, yes.
Can you tell the difference between type A and type B?
Yes, you can. Now we're going to get technical. Everybody still on board with this? Okay. If you take one of these nails and you hold it up to the light and you look along the edge, there's what is known as a burr mark. And the burr is where the metal folds a little bit when it gets struck. So with the type A cut nails, I wish I had a blackboard at least. Okay, here's our nail. And if we take, looking at the end of the nail, there would be a burr mark here going down, and over here there's a burr mark here that's going up. If you could visualize this. Okay, for the type B ones, because it's flipped, just trust me on this, it works. Both burr marks are on the same side because it's flipped over. So that's how we tell. And I usually, I'll look at these, look at raking light, and you can usually, or your finger, you can usually feel it's a little bit sharper on one side or the other. But when it's kind of rounded here and sharp there, that's a type B cut nail, which is very, very common. It's the ones that are here and here on the cross section that are rare, and those are from the early 1800s. But hey, where did I find? I found down at Rokeby Museum, if you know in Ferrisburg, or Rokeby Museum, looking at the old part of the back part, the earliest house part on their property, we found type A cut nails with hand wrought heads. I think it's circa 1790, 91, somewhere around there. So it was sort of that transition. So this evidence is out there. Down at the Theron Boyd property in Queechee. Also, there were hand-wrought nails, especially on holding the clapboards on the house. And you could, I think they're still there. Last time I was there, they're still there. So anyway, this is that kind of physical evidence that we sometimes can use to determine the age of buildings, and especially what is so great about barns is that it's visible. It hasn't been covered up with all types of finishing. Yes?
I'm confused. I would have thought that if you didn't flip the metal, the burr marks would be on the same side.
Yeah. You're not the first person who's been confused by that. And let me tell you, in class I have sometimes explained it. And let's say instead of an iron nail, let's take a stick of cold butter, and instead of a machine that's cleaving it down, let's just take something that's, I don't know if I can. Well, all right. Here is our cross section, our piece of. I'm trying to visualize it with what we have here. But the reality is, as that striker comes down and it hits the edge, it smears down some of the metal. Okay? And so then the one that's getting cut, it smears down, but it moves ahead, and then when it hits again, that one that just got smeared down, when it hits this edge, is going to get smeared up because it's pushing it down.
Because the edge is in a different place.
Yeah.
That's the edge that was there is in a different place.
Right. So if you can imagine, if we've got this stick of butter, and I take, I don't know what I'm going to take, a hammer, and probably not quite that much, but if I go whack it down like that, what comes off is going to be smeared up a little bit, the one that came off. Does that make sense? I know it's a challenge to. Hey, I'll tell you. So just try it. I don't know what you want to try it with, but anyway, what is I went to a lecture like this once, and I don't know, I've been invited to give these talks in different parts around the country, especially Michigan and so on, and I gave a talk. And somebody, as you very well asked, this, like I say, I'm glad you asked the question. Students typically also ask the question skeptically, which is great. This is what's so good. And just for the fun of it, I mean, I got I don't know, it was something online, and somebody wrote in, how in the world could a professor at the university say such things, quite stupid, about the nails. And so, I kind of replied, and I suggested, I forget what it was, that he try it, and lo and behold, that's the way it works. I don't know. To a certain degree, you can sort of see the same thing if you take, I don't know, metal is the best because it doesn't really do with paper, but metal is the best, a thin sheet of metal. And even if you take scissors, because scissors have kind of these two planes, and you think about when that scissor blade comes down, it isn't really slicing through, it's shearing. So it's this shearing effect, and that when that top pressure comes down, what gets pushed away gets bent up slightly on the edge to the burr, and the one that's left there, or the other side, gets bent down. It's sort of stretched out. Anyway, so I'm glad you asked the question. I challenged the person who challenged me, and then, whatever it was, a week later, I got a very nice message thinking, well, who would have thought? You're absolutely, that is the way it works. So it's sort of one of these things that defies intuition, but it does kind of explain it. there's I mean, and to this day, the way that these cut nails are made, which are usually used for flooring and other things, we need more surface area for more grip. They put these nail rods that, you know, can be like 8 feet long and, or bars, maybe for, I don't know, 8, 10, 12 penny nail this wide. That goes into a tube, into a pipe. And then these machines just come whack, whack, and it spins. I'll tell you, I've been to one of these places, the noisiest place on earth, as you can imagine. And out come these type B cut nails. Anyway, it's some you know, get online, do a wiki for type B cut nails and see what you see what you find. So anyway, yes.
You only have the burr, only one burr.
Well, no, there are two burrs, because with the type B, it gets flipped over, and they end up both on the same side. That's how I remember burr, both burrs, type B. Yes, yeah. Yeah, take a stick of butter, cold butter preferably, and try it. So anyways, it's a little something to do this evening. If, you know, you could probably bread dough would do the same thing, you know, or pie crust, you know. Anyway, all right. So where are we now? So yeah. So I mean, as far as getting back to the barns, those three things, or at least the way that the frame is constructed, the types of fasteners were, you know, very, very informative with regards to how to determine the age of buildings, for which there may be very little written about. Let's face it, for houses, you know, there's typically more written about it. I mean, we have deeds. Deeds are about property, but at least there may be more information there. In urban areas, city directories, we have insurance maps and so on, with kind of the focus for buildings, and we can learn, you know, approximate the age from those things. But for rural areas, it's trickier. So the one source that I found to be the most valuable for doing this kind of archival research on the history of farm buildings is the Federal Agricultural Census. I think these were census records, federal census, taken every 10 years, of course. In my experience, again, doing research, especially on Vermont barns, the census records from 1830, 40, 50, 60, 70, and I think 80 is the last one. Then there was a fire, and from then on, they haven't been available. The census records are basically, it's organized county by county, town by town, and then in those records, basically, it's either alphabetical. If it's non-alphabetical, it's usually the sequence that whoever was the census taker went from one property to the next. So if you happen to look, say, at there's the Beers Atlas map. Some of you may be familiar with that. From 1869 for Chittenden County and in the 1870s and so on, other counties and similar maps. Sometimes we get a name on a location when we're trying to figure out, you know, when and who and so on and so forth. Well, then if you can coordinate that name with the census records, the census records don't usually describe the buildings, but they will describe who's living there, or at least how many people are living there, and in various categories, and also how many animals there are, how many cows, how many sheep, how many acres of oats, and so on and so forth. So although there's no description of the buildings, we can piece that together and get a sense of what was going on. And so if they've got 15 cows, you know, in 1850, there would have been a barn. I mean, we know that. And then so that's sort of the way to kind of corroborate, if you will, physical evidence that we may be seeing there. So anyway, if for any of you who are interested in doing kind of follow-up research, let me just say, to the best of my knowledge, these agricultural census records, they may be online now, but I haven't found them yet. And I ended up, you know, they have them at the University of Vermont Special Collections, but they're on microfilm. You know, You remember microfilm, you know? And so you got to get the right county and zing, 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 and you're going to find it there, and you can do a printout, but it's time consuming, but it's a gold mine of information. So, yeah, you have a question? No?
Yes, I did. I was just wondering, what kind of wood did they use on these barns?
That's a wonderful question. Yeah, and I've seen a variety of different types of woods being used. Generally, on one hand, especially for farm buildings, it would need to be a strong, durable wood that was easily accessible. So if we're in a rural area, before the railroads came in especially, it would typically be wood that would have been harvested nearby. So pine and spruce work quite well. That's very, very common for the frame. However, I certainly did come across a number of hardwood frames, even down in Cornwall, Jack Watts' barn. I was amazed. We looked at that together, and I think that dates from around 1790. Chestnut frame before the chestnut blight obliterated those trees. So sometimes we'd find oak. I found some elm actually down at Rokeby in some of the buildings, but you know, yeah, I mean, it takes a little bit of microscopy to look at the end grain and so on to determine. Hemlock, yeah, hemlock for boards, especially hemlock for floorboards. You know, we want something that's tough, and that was the other reason why I would never go into the barn wearing bare feet, because hemlock equals splinters. You know, you look at hemlock board and you've got a splinter. I mean, you know, for those of you who have done any woodworking, you know what that's like, right? But hemlock, yeah, hemlock would have been somewhat, you know, it's durable, somewhat cheaper because it doesn't finish off as well as pine. Spruce would be delightful because it tends to grow quite straight and strong with small branches, so that can be hewn. That's, you know, perfectly for nice long beams, you know, plates and so on. So, and it would last. Yeah, right. Yeah. Yes, yes, sure.
Tom, I'm interested if you could give us a little bit of current history of what's happening.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. In preparation for for this afternoon, you know, I've sort of been asking myself that question, you know, and sure, you know, there it was in the 90s, which is, hey, my goodness, that's been a few decades ago that I was out there, you know, and at that time, there's no doubt that the future of many of the older barns, especially 19th century barns, was in question. Yeah, what's the current situation with barns and historic barns? So, as I say, sort of in preparation for today's talk, I took a number of field trips and did sort of one Champlain Valley one. I did kind of a number around the state, and it was kind of fun in a way, but it's also kind of stressful in a way because I tried to go along many of the routes that I had taken photos of decades ago. And I think, I mean, overall, the most stressful part, of course, was to see how many fewer barns are still standing and the condition that those that are standing are in. Now, what we tend to have, of course, you know, Vermont is known primarily for its dairy farming. And indeed, these grand barns, these beautiful big postcard barns that I'm sure you're all kind of imagining when you thought I'd be showing some pictures of it, I did, I would have, you know, with the big red barn and so on, you know, were primarily dairy barns. The dairy farming industry, of course, has gone through changes. And let me kind of maybe back that up to put it into a little bit of context. During the late 1700s, early 1800s, a lot of the people who were living in Vermont were practicing what we call subsistence farming, right? They had the barns for, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 cows, maybe 4 or 5 pigs, maybe some chickens, maybe some sheep, whatever, especially during the sheep boom. So they tended to be smaller buildings, typically measuring about 30 feet by 40 feet for that so-called English barn. Then, what with the sort of changes that happened during the mid 1800s, especially with the huge cultural stress that happened during the American Civil War when there was an acute labor shortage. That then combined with the coming of the railroads, the sort of mechanization that was happening elsewhere, led to what became known as the model barn movement. And that whole concept was to try to figure out how to do farming to increase production, but at the same time reduce labor, okay? And so there were a number of innovations that were developed during that period from the 1850s well into the 1890s or 1900s. The cupola on the barn. Well, basically, those were being added to improve the ventilation. The ventilation had to be improved because the thought was the older barns would have had gaps like this between the boards. The idea was if the cows could be kept warmer during the winter months, we could feed them less food. Therefore, for the amount of food we could get off of our acreage, we could increase the size of our herd if we tighten up the barn. But what's the big problem here? When you tighten up the barn, okay, you've got a choice, and this is the manure quotient. Okay, one could either shovel that manure out the wall regularly, daily, twice a day, maybe, and put it in a big pile, and then put it back on the field. But if you did that, the rain, especially the snow and so on, would leach out a lot of those nutrients. So what was kind of integrated into this planning by the 1850s for these model barns was to make it easy to just shovel the manure down through a hole in the floor into the basement and to protect it there. And then the problem, of course, was the gases, the ammonia from the urine. I mean, all of that, and extremely unhealthy not only for the cows but for the humans as well. So this is then where we led to the cupolas coming on to provide that ventilation so that they could heat or at least hold heat in the stable area, but then vent the gases out of the top. So that we get this character defining feature of these barns. These big barns with the cupolas on top that became decorative by the 1870s and 1880s. So then the story continues as we get into the late 1800s, and it became apparent, primarily due to some research that was being done in Europe, that at the time, of course, one of the most serious diseases that was affecting humans as well as dairy animals was tuberculosis. And so the recognition that this was a pathogen, and that this pathogen, the tuberculin bacteria, could be spread from animal to animal, particularly through the dust. So this is sort of a number of things. First of all, the whitewashing interior of the barn stable areas to help reduce that. But then also there was a shift away from for those older cow stables with the stanchions and so on, if they had a wooden floor, in order to keep that from getting infected. The problem, of course, with tuberculosis is if one cow gets it, the only treatment option was to cull the entire herd, and quite possibly that infection in the milk could then infect anyone who drank the milk, and then the family has it, or if it's being sold, and so on. So basically, the big milk market in the Boston area said, I think it was around the 1890s or whatever, they said, okay, no longer, there were no government regulations, but the buyers of the milk said, we will not accept milk from herds where the cows are being stabled in a facility where there may be this dust and this manure because of the risk of tuberculosis in the milk. So the treatment for that, the option was to move the cows down to the basement or at grade. So we have then a new design in the early 20th century called the ground level stable barn. Okay, so the whole goal here was to put the cows on a concrete floor, and the idea is because it's concrete, it could be kept wet. So have lots of water, hose it down every day, get that manure, wash it down, put it into the gutter, scoot it out of the building, or put it in a manure shed or something like that. So that revolutionized the design of barns, and these beautiful, beautiful high drive barns and round barns that were being constructed, of which we have some really wonderful examples in the area here from the 1880s and 1890s, unfortunately became functionally obsolete by the 19-teens and 1920s, unless special measures were taken. And we do have a number of wonderful examples. I stopped at one in East Montpelier, the Sibley Farms, where they adapted, and they were able to maintain that those sanitary conditions. But for new buildings, it was cheaper, in essence, to use some standardized patterns. There were these companies in the Midwest, Iowa, for example, that could sell the barn plans, and we find examples all over Vermont, New York State, you name it, Michigan, of the same design with the ground level stables. And those tend to be from the 1920s to 30s and so on. Continuing with the story, I know I'm wandering a bit, but I hope it's on target. With the development of antibiotics, 1940s and 1950s, especially after the Second World War, then that became the effective treatment to deal with tuberculosis and other communicable diseases in herds and other animals. And so that then was being introduced into the feed. And then we start to get freestall barns and other types. Spooky. But anyway, so I'm sorry. Did I answer your question, or did I skip around it? Right. Yes. Okay. So, right. All right. So that then, basically, what happened then was that barns constructed, say, before the 1950s or 1960s became functionally obsolete. Okay? So then from a preservation point of view, what we run into then is these beautiful, magnificent barns that we had scattered, across the state of Vermont. In essence, by the, 50, 60, 70 years ago, were not being used much for dairy farming, but they might be used for storage, but there was not so much incentive to maintain them. So we've sort of seen that rate of loss for these older barns accelerating. So I think that's kind of been the fundamental issue. They became functionally obsolete, and therefore the economic incentive to maintain them basically has been diminished. And these newer generations of barns, especially from the 1960s and 70s, are now dominating what dairy farming is going on. We also have the consolidation of much larger herds, more corporate interests going on. I don't know if there are anyone here have a herd of, say, 30 cows. I mean, that was the standard in the 1890s. 30 cows, yeah. I mean, that, whereas today, what's a typical herd on a dairy farm? 200 at least? 500? I mean, so that's been. So, but where it leads to us with regards to the future of barns, one of the things that certainly came out in my, excursions over the past several months in preparation for this afternoon is sort of asking the question, okay, what's going on in those older barns that are still there now? And primarily, the answer is storage. Okay, hey, that barn where I grew up, we store stuff in there. I don't know, from Mexico, that's what you do. It's whether it's the lawnmower, maybe it's where the car goes in, the snow blowers, you name it. In essence, it's adapting its use, and they work quite well for storage, especially, shall we say, cold storage. in a good number of farms where they have adapted with new buildings, the barns may still be used for storing equipment or maybe hay, especially if they're doing big circular hay bales, if they don't just put plastic over them and leave them out, and other things. But basically, that's sort of where we're going. But that sort of then leads to us. Well, okay. Ask you. Yes.
There is a standing existing barn still in Montpelier. Maybe there's more than one.
Sure.
There's a barn up Northfield Street off of Colonial Drive that is in beautiful shape that's being used to store old cars and things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So storage is kind of the default use. Yes.
Our neighbor took their old barn that they inherited through time down, made a small, very nice B&B in there.
Oh wow. Sure. So there's this adaptive reuse. Again, when doing the excursion, some of the barns that I visited have been used for a variety of other storage things or whatever. Yes. The question? Oh, sorry.
I raised sheep. Now, how did the sheep, redesign the barns?
Hey, that's a great question. The sheep and the sheep boom. So, you probably know the story, but anyway, as far as the history of Vermont, what was an incredibly early, lucky episode, and oh gosh, I don't recall the exact year, but that was the introduction of merino sheep to Vermont. And merino, of course, were a breed of sheep that was raised in Spain and Portugal, and initially they were tightly controlled, and it was some, I forget his name, but it was some consulate or ambassador or whatever. Somehow he brought a small group of merino sheep to Vermont and started to raise them. And the beauty of merino sheep is that the merino wool, as many of us may know, is just wonderfully soft and fluffy, quite unlike the other kind of wool from the sheep that have been kind of brought over here from the British Isles. That's rather coarse and scratchy in comparison.
Spinners loved it.
Yeah, exactly. So then by the 18-teens, 1820s, Vermont, especially in the Champlain Valley, became world suppliers of merino wool. The slogan goes that there were more sheep than people, and that the sheep growers would light their cigars with $100 bills. That sort of, we hear these stories. However, what happened was, as far as barns are concerned, sheep don't need much. They just need kind of a shelter for the young ones for birthing, but we don't get the grand sheep barns.
I had a 3-sided sheep barn.
There you go.
You can't have a 4-sided sheep barn.
Nope. They've got to come and they go. So basically, what happened though was that with the opening up of raising sheep and growing or sheep for merino wool and other types of wool in Australia, South Africa, and other parts around the world, by the 1840s, there was a crash in the value of wool, and so Vermont sheep farmers basically had to do something, and what they did, they shifted to dairy. So that then meant that the old sheep barns with the 3-sided ones or whatever were either converted or basically neglected, and then the dairy barns went up.
So there really was an alteration in the barn construction because of the sheep. They didn't put the 4th side up.
Yep, that's it. Right. Yeah.
That's what I heard.
There's a nice example at the Justin Morrill homestead. That property in Stratford, up on back on the hill of a sheep barn that's wide open like that. They're pretty scarce. They're really scarce. Where's yours?
In East Burke.
In East Burke. Oh, neat. Hey, that's great. So there aren't that many. They're pretty rare.
Actually, it's not an old barn.
Oh, nice. That will work? Sure. Yeah. Right. I think one other sort of type of older sheep-related barn that I did find was kind of a small barn-like structure that on the upstairs had one big room that was plastered walls and ceilings, and that the whole idea that was a place that they could take the fleeces and store them without the rats and everybody else getting in there to make a stinky mess. Yeah, right. So yes, question.
Yeah, I'm interested in circular barns.
Oh, neat.
We have a few in Vermont.
Right.
I think the design is very interesting, but I just wonder what the practicality of them. We don't
Yeah.
have some,
Yeah. Well, again, this is one of these examples of, remember I was sort of talking about how a better idea was coming along during the late 1800s. And sort of the justification for the round barn, so-called, although some were hexagonal and some had 10 sides or 12 sides or whatever, was that one could enclose a certain amount of space with less materials. It was kind of a stylistic element as well as practical. I mean, for many of them, they had a central silo in the middle, and then, they would have a feeding trough, and it was kind of less labor was the idea. The ones that were built here in Vermont generally date from the heyday was 1890s through the 19-teens. But what happened is many of these were also what we call high drive barns with a ramp of some sort going up to the hayloft up above. The second middle floor was for the cows and stanchions, and then there was the manure basement underneath. So they had wooden floors. So, I mean, it was labor saving that way, but then what with the issues that I was talking about with the tuberculosis and so on, they then became obsolete with that shift over to the concrete floored ground level stable barns certainly by the 1920s and 1930s. So that was the issue. Fortunately, we have a good number, well, a few dozen that have been preserved that are real landmarks. They're so incredible that they look sorry. Yeah. Yes, back here. Oh, wow, good. Sure, yeah. So some still have been used. Yes. In Waitsfield. Yes, right. Yeah. And we lost one in Ferrisburg also about 10 years ago or so. Yes. Oh, here we go.
I need a thing, huh?
There you go.
Okay, I'm going to tell you about the barn that we have. It was moved 6 miles when the owner that my husband's father...
Yeah, close. Yeah, right close.
Close.
There you
Okay.
go. Now we got it.
Okay, so the it arrived at the property that we have because it was moved 6 miles because the owner of the property then offered Farmer Baird a room, but he said he wasn't coming without his barn. So they moved it 6 miles, bit by bit, and it's a bank barn, but I don't think that's what it originally was because there were a lot of parts left over.
Oh, beautiful. Oh, beautiful.
And it's 3 levels. It's got those vertical boards, and then there's a bit on the front of it which have clapboards.
Neat.
And so the area where the manure went, which is down there on the basement, is now used for horses.
Wonderful. So what's great here is that you've introduced this other type of barn that's known as a bank barn. A bank barn. And to put that into context, that first generation subsistence farming kind of barn that I talked about from the 1700s, often it was a 30 by 40 foot structure built at grade. And these early English barns, as we call them, would have a center drive floor, yes, quite literally. There would be a heavy floor in there that could be used for threshing the grain. And then on one side, there would be a haymow that would go up typically all the way to the roof. And then on the other side, there would be a stable area for a few cows, whatever, tools, equipment, and so on. So that was our kind of our first type of barn. Then a better idea came along. By the 1820s and 1830s, the bank barn. And this bank barn, the whole idea was instead of siting the barn on a level location, put it on a hill so that one could get access to the upper story and then have an accessible basement underneath. Now, early on, they tried horses. There were some complaints that horses were getting eye infections before, there were, medical treatments for those sort of things. But what animals thrived in the barn basements, do you think? Pigs. Pigs and chickens to a certain degree, but the pigs especially. So these bank barns, we have lots of examples of these bank barns dating from around 1800 to around 1840, before the model barns with the cupolas and all of those sort of things were developed. So that's really neat to see from your images there. I don't know, do you know, I'm guessing 1830s, 1840s from that old barn that would have been. Okay, good. Elliot was one of my students, and he has become one of the premier reconstructors and builders and repairers of barns. So that's and reconstructing, yes. No, that's great. I think the other name, just to drop the name, is Jan Lewandowski. Maybe you have some who may have worked with him, and he is a timber framer who has worked on many, many historic barns, including the one that everybody sees driving from Montpelier to Burlington and Richmond off the interstate. And that was a really fun project because, the situation is that the barn that's closest to Burlington had been neglected for a long time. The owners didn't want it anymore. They had no need for it. They wanted to get rid of it. But there was an arrangement made to reconstruct it on the adjacent lot. And so here was the trick. At the time, there was some potential federal funding available, and it was called, I think it was called, quote, I don't remember what the acronym meant, but it's the ICE-T grants, Inter-Surface Transportation Enhancement, whatever. And so the deal was that if the case could be made to the federal government, whomever, Federal Transportation Agency, that barn somehow was contributing to transportation-related themes or whatever, that there might be some federal funding available to preserve it. So anyway, it was one of these gigs that I did when I was a consultant, and so I helped the State Preservation Office. I basically made the case that barn was important to the experience of visitors to Vermont who were driving along the interstate. It was part of that transportation experience. It's also at the time visible by anyone from the railroads when we had rail going along. This was in the 90s. This was in the 90s, 98-ish, somewhere around there. So anyway, lo and behold, we got an ICE-T grant, and I don't recall how much it was. It wasn't peanuts. It was but that helped take down the old, and it was really the old one. It was really rotten, but they very, very carefully preserved what wood they could, and reconstructed exactly what was on the adjacent property. And you see it today. It's there. So anyway, it's sort of been one of these, shall we say, success stories.
They call that a monitor barn?
It's a monitor roof barn, yes. And
Are there many monitor barns?
no. It's there may be a few more, but those are really landmark buildings. I found a couple. I found one in Connecticut, and there are some scattered around. But they're basically, instead of a cupola, it has this long raised so-called monitor that provides light that goes right down onto the central floor. It's something we see in factories from that era, so it's sort of adapting factory design to a barn design in the 1890s or so.
The only two in Vermont?
There may be one or two more smaller ones, but those are the two big ones.
What year was that they were built?
Yes, these are the ones we're talking about. Those two on Route 89. Yeah.
So they're on, really on Route 2.
Right, yeah. So anyway, I think this is the cue for we're out of time. All right. Okay, question. Okay.
I have found as I drive around Vermont, I have all these beautiful barns, and I'm always awestruck, actually. I love stopping and looking at them. But one of my favorites is right down the road from me. I live in Adamant, and at the end of Sodom Pond Road and Haggett Road are the Sibley barns.
Yes, the Sibley barn,
And
sure.
it's absolutely astounding. It's this big yellow barn, comes like this, and as I come up the hill quite often, I'll take yet another picture. So I wondered if we could have them address that. I didn't even know what the question, but would you speak a little bit about your beautiful barn?
I don't think I'm prepared here.
So it was quite an opportune, let me just say, it was quite an opportune coincidence that in preparation for the talk, when I was driving around and passing through East Montpelier, I happened to go along the road there, and I was awestruck once again by the Sibley barn. I pulled off the road, and I stepped out to take a picture, and I looked up, and there, sitting on the porch, were the Sibleys. And so I came up and introduced myself, and we had an absolutely wonderful chat. So I will turn that over as your introduction. So.
Yeah, one of my questions is, do you know what kind of wood is the frame?
As far as I know, spruce.
It is spruce.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's an
How old is it?
it was built in 1899.
And your family the whole time?
Yes, yes. We've been there since. All right. The Sibleys have been there since 1836, and my wife and I took over in 1975. We had milking cows there until 2001, and we did what you said. It was an upstairs wooden stable. In 1970, we went to the ground floor. We put in 3 stalls and a milking parlor. And but we could see it was getting obsolete, and I think we probably gave up about the right time, because it just wasn't, it just didn't work out. There was a lot of labor involved, and
You have 5 cows in there now, don't you? They come up to my car when I stop.
the Fairmont farm is just over the road, and they have they milk upwards of 1,600 cows, and they bring 4 cows over to us, so that we think we still farm.
To look at, everybody stops.
Yeah.
That's really funny.
Right. Yeah.
They're pets.
Yeah. Right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
It's been really wonderful, yeah.